Hi everybody, my name's Chris Collison, and in today's short video we're going to be talking about how to connect ideas, concepts, characters, actions. This connection is the most important thing that we can do as a scientific communicator. We have to be able to connect those ideas. We have to enable the reader's understanding of the science we're trying to describe. So in today's short video, perhaps one of the most powerful in the sequence, we're going to be looking at subordinate conjunctions and adverbs as some of the key tools in your toolbox to make those connections complete. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. So welcome back, and of course again I'm going to remind you of the subtitle here: clear, concise and compelling. That's what we're trying to do with all our writing and all our presenting. So this is the second part of the lecture for week 3 in CHEM 670. We've already talked about how we align with the audience and the importance of conveying the image that we want to put forward. So now we're going to talk about connectors. And I put it to you that we must connect in science. In fact, I think much of life and those aha moments all come about when we understand something and when we make connections. So the other important thing to recognize is that connecting empowers us. And so I think a better way of explaining this is to provide an example. So here we go. A couple of years ago, there was a horrendous storm where I was living, and it turned out that my basement flooded because of that storm. This statement ends up being what I would call an A to D type description. What's happening here is we've gone from A, there being a storm in this case, to B, the basement flooding. And we know that there are some things in between there that perhaps have led to the basement being flooded. With this flood, for example, and by the way, I lost a lot of carpeting, and it was a finished basement, so a lot of it had to be reworked and rebuilt. So this was a huge problem. If we don't have the connections in between to go from A to D, then we may not understand why it happened, and so the same problem could occur again and again. So in this particular case, with this particular statement, if I'm putting this to the new tenants of the house, for example, it's seemingly helpless. We can't do anything to stop the rain, and therefore we might just concede to the idea that our basement is going to always flood when there's a big weather event. Alternatively, by communicating what exactly happened, and that would be the A to B to C to D description, we might be empowered. We might be able to do something about this. So I'm going to read you the following. The basement is flooding because the house lost power because of the storm. The power to the house drives the sump pump, which routinely removes any water that drains into the basement. By using a local generator to power the sump pump, we can prevent the basement from flooding during a severe storm that knocks out the power. And this was in fact what I ended up deciding to do. So of course this is now an A, B, C, D description. The storm did lead to a broken power line, and that's why the power went out. That's why the sump pump failed, and that's why the basement flooded. So by providing a generator, in fact I got a battery backup, then I could prevent similar problems from occurring in the future. And this ends up being empowering, and this is the point of science. When we understand what's going on, when we understand these connections, then we can become more empowered in the world, and we can try to address many of the problems that humanity is facing. So how do we connect? Well, we use conjunctions, and there are two types of conjunctions. There are coordinating conjunctions. These are things like for and nor, but, or, yet, and so. But the most valuable ones to us as scientists are subordinating conjunctions, and these connect two particular clauses, and such subordinating conjunctions are if, so that, because, or while, and there's a bunch more that we're going to start to look at. So because scientific writing depends on these causal relationships, we're going to spend some time here thinking about how to link those relationships together. So my top tip here is to use subordinate conjunctions. Here's an example. So if we write, even though the film absorbance increased, the device efficiency decreased, there's a connection between these two clauses. The use of even though requires us to follow with both a character and a verb. So in this case, the film absorbance is the subject of this sentence, and the verb is increased in here. So when we use such a subordinating conjunction, and we'll find the same is true with adverbs, we find ourselves using a character and a verb, and that was one of the key outcomes of the first few videos. So even though the film absorbance increased, the device efficiency decreased. So we follow up that first clause with a second clause that has both a character and a verb. In contrast, we could equally write the same sentence with a preposition. In this case, the preposition with actually leads to a nominalization. And how do we know we have a nominalization? So with an increase in film absorbance. So we'll note here that an increase is a noun. So that's the verb being described in terms of a noun. So with an increase in film absorbance, the device efficiency decreased. So that's our nominalization. And this with, by the way, is what we would call a preposition. And prepositions tend to lead us more to nominalizations. So the top tip here is use subordinate conjunctions to connect your clauses, your phrases. Let's have a look at certain subordinate conjunctions. And again, the goal here is to have strong characters and strong verbs in our writing. So these are the best tools. And we can break down these subordinate conjunctions into several categories. Time, so before, while, when, as, after, and since. These are all time-based conjunctions. There's cause, so why does something happen? This is really important in science. So we should often use because and since and why. When and as are sometimes weaker forms of because, so perhaps we should not use these so frequently. Condition, again in science, something happens because of a particular cause. The condition subordinate conjunctions are if, so long as, only when, provided, unless, except when. So in other words, we have to have A happen in order for B to happen subsequently. That's the condition. We also recognize the importance of contradictions in science. And this actually frames our writing rather nicely. I'll talk shortly about storytelling and how often we want to describe a happy status quo situation, which then we'll end up disrupting in order to grab the reader's attention. So contradiction subordinate conjunctions are most useful. So while, although, even though, and though are good contradictory or contradiction subordinate conjunctions. Other explicit connectors, so we want to be more explicit with our writing, we don't want to be vague, so more explicit connectors. Adverbs. Adverbs do a good job. They do not join clauses, but they do explicitly state the connection between actions. Time, so meanwhile, afterwards, simultaneously, first, second, third, fourth, etc. These adverbs typically go at the beginning of sentences, and they tell us how the action is taking place, and they usually connect a prior sentence in the paragraph. Adverbs for cause is thus, therefore, consequently. You can understand how these would begin the start of a sentence. Contradiction, so however, nevertheless, rather, alternatively, and instead. I put an asterisk here by however because Often I find people use however in the middle of sentences and it does not fit because it's an adverb. So however is not a conjunction. Use this at the start of your sentences. Okay, at the start of phrases, however is an adverb. Addition, so also, furthermore, moreover, similarly, likewise. These adverbs all start to connect different sentences within a paragraph, connecting back to that central theme of the paragraph. They allow the flow within your prose. Other adverbs, we may use certain stock phrases as connecting adverbs. So a few examples here again. To begin with, in the meantime, for one thing and for another. These stock phrases though tend to add more words, so you may want to be frugal with using stock phrases when perhaps one word would suffice. And often we're going to have a word count that we have to make sure we stick to. So be careful with stock phrases. Another stock phrases for cause. Stock phrase for cause is as a result, contradiction, on the contrary, in contrast, on the other hand, addition, so in addition, in the same way, in other words, for example, and that is. So these work very well. Be careful when it comes to word counts. So to summarize what we've just said, use explicit connectors. These are so important in your writing as a scientist. We connect actions using these conjunctions or adverbs. When we do this, readers understand. And as scientists, that is what we need for readers to be able to do. We need for readers to be able to understand what we are trying to say. And when they understand what we're trying to say, it empowers them. And I think that's the whole point of us as scientists. Conjunctions and connecting adverbs, they state logical relationships. That logos, those logical relationships are so important in science, absolutely essential. So we need to get used to using these. Prepositions can be vague. So we tend to want to avoid, if at all possible, avoid using prepositions to connect our sentences. That concludes this particular section. In the next piece, again, we go further and deeper and into more powerful descriptions as to how we can improve our writing. We're going to talk about information and context. We're going to think about starting with the familiar and then providing something new to the reader. And we're also going to think about how readers view the information that we're providing for them. So, I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks very much for your attention.